Hello class. As promised, this is chapter 5, the lecture that I'm doing via video because we didn't get a chance to review it in class. So this chapter looks at consumer behavior and how advertisers use it to influence purchasing habits. This lecture is just an overview, so make sure you read the full chapter. Okay, let's start with the human connection. From the time we enter this world, we are using the human connection to communicate our needs and wants. As babies, we cry for various reasons. Then, as we get older, we learn to listen and respond to how we respond to others and others respond to us through messages. It is done through a process that takes a message from the source to the receiver. And on page 123, there's a diagram that illustrates this. So let's break it down. First, we have the source. The organization or the advertiser that has information and it wants to share with the public or the consumer. And they usually use a spokesperson to do this, but this person must appear knowledgeable, trustworthy, and relevant to the audience. All right, then you have the message. Now that is actually what is being sent, and it is through an encoding and decoding process. The message encoded in such a way that the receiver understands what is being communicated. This typically involves semiotics, and semiotics is words or symbols that are familiar to the audience. And it's how we convey meaning through those symbols. Then we have the channel, the means by which the message travels from source to receiver. The channels can be personal, like a personal somebody selling something, or non-personal, which is mass communications. All right. Let's continue. The receiver. The receiver is the person who receives the message. So advertisers must be concerned how the consumer will decode the message. So you have your encoding and you have your decoding. The encoding is on the way out from the message through the channel, okay? And then from the channel to the receiver who decodes the message. However, interpretation is only partially determined by words and symbols in the ad. Other influences include the medium that was used and the characteristics of the receiver. And another complication is that hundreds of other messages compete with the advertisement, which is referred to as noise. So if you have an advertisement and you see two advertisements for cars, you're getting noise because you're getting those two advertisements on the same basic kind of product. So you have to worry about the noise and how to get through it to get to your consumer. Okay. Then we get to the feedback. The feedback is important because it verifies the message was received and understood. Feedback employs the same sender-message-receiver pattern, except that it's directed from the receiver back to the original source. So in other words, you go to a fast food restaurant and you get that little receipt and it says, you know, you can get a free whatever if you take this survey. That's a form of feedback. And they can take many forms: redeem coupons, telephone inquiries, visits to the store, requests for more information, increased sales, and responses to a survey or an email. Low responses to an ad indicate a break in the communication process. Feedback helps to determine whether that break in communication is occurring. Customers can provide the feedback through interactive media in the same channels as the sponsors. So it's more of a give and take relationship that helps both the receiver, the customer, and the sponsor itself. All right. Now we're going to get into where we begin to know the customer, okay, or the consumer. So it's very important to know the consumer, because how else are you going to get your ad out there through all the noise and the interference and the perceptions and everything that I'll talk about in a minute. You have to penetrate all of those layers before that person or your consumer will actually buy your product. All right, so in order for an advertisement to be effective, the marketer must know how to connect with the appropriate audience. We kind of touched on this in chapter 4. We learned how to understand potential customers through market segmentation. Advertisers spend millions and millions to keep individuals and other markets interested in their products, because to succeed, they must understand what makes potential customers behave the way they do. To do this, they study consumer behavior to find enough relevant market data to develop accurate profiles. But how do consumers decide on purchases? So take a minute and think about how you decide on a purchase, whether it be your next gas for your vehicle, or if it's a long-term item, if you're trying to furnish your apartment with a new sofa or a new chair. Just kind of think about the ways that you go through the processes of, okay, what am I going to buy? Where am I going to go? What do I want? Do I want a sofa? Do I want a chair? Do I prefer, as far as gas, do I prefer one gas station over another? Or is it more about price, whoever has the cheapest? These are the kind of things that that advertisers must understand and know about the consumer to be able to get through to them so that they will purchase that advertiser's product. So most of the time, the consumer decision-making process is a rapid evaluation program run by our mental computers the moment a medium delivers an advertising message to us. Okay, what does that mean? That just means we can make instant decisions or we can take longer. Those instant decisions are your everyday products, like what you choose to eat for the day, or whether or not you need gas, and that sort of thing. The longer it is, it's more of those items that you're going to keep for a longer time. But like I talked about, you're furnishing your room, or you're out to buy new clothes, and so you're trying to decide what you want to buy and evaluate all that's out there, because it's a plethora of data that consumers go through. Okay, now there are basic steps to this, which is the personal processes, the influences, and the evaluation. So the personal processes, it's how we take what we saw or heard, or both, and translate them into feelings, thoughts, beliefs, and actions through perception, learning, and motivation. Then you have your influences. That is how our processes and behavior are affected, involving interpersonal, which is family, society, and culture, or non-personal, which is those things that are outside our control, like time, place, and environment. Then we get to the evaluation part. That's the critical moment of whether or not we are going to buy that product. However, even then, there might be alternatives to address as well, like your brands, your styles, and the colors. And if we do purchase an item, we go through what's called a post-purchase evaluation that will affect whether or not we buy this product again in the future. Even though it's a split-second decision, it sure takes a lot of time to talk about it. So let's look at these a little deeper. All right, our personal processes. All right, I'm going to go ahead and bring these up for you. Okay, so perception is the information we receive through our five senses. It is important because we're exposed to thousands of ads daily, but notice only a handful and remember even fewer. This is the first and greatest hurdle advertisers face. And it is done through stimuli, perceptual and physiological screens, cognition, and mental files. All right. In order for the message to penetrate and get us to react to it, it must first stimulate our senses enough to break through our subconscious filters. Then it will be measured through our physiological screens to see if it's something we really want to pay attention to, enough to reach the cognition and store in our mental files for later. So think about the types of ads that you see every day. First, that ad has to stimulate our senses, sight, sound, hearing, those five senses. All right. Then it has to go through our subconscious filtering that we're constantly always saying, you ignore the message for one reason or another. That's our perceptual screens. Then it goes to our physiological screens that it measures the stimuli. If the stimuli is enough to penetrate through the perceptual screen, then you've got, okay, you pay attention to it a little more. So all of a sudden, now you start, the advertiser has been able to capture your attention a little bit more. Then you get to the cognition. So that's where you comprehend the message. And so you're like, oh, okay, now I understand that. And then you store it for later. So you may not think that you go to the store and you pick up your next brand of body wash, but you see these other body washes, and all of a sudden you remember an ad for a particular body wash that you've not used before. You may or may not buy that body wash depending on how that ad went through your personal processes in order to get into your mental file so that you could bring it up later while you're at the store and say, oh, okay, well, maybe I want to try that particular brand this time. So that's what advertisers are working on constantly through their messages. All right, so that's just one part of it. Then we get into the influences. Okay? We all know how influence can play a part in our daily lives. Advertisers make use of this as well through our interpersonal and non-personal ways. So interpersonal involves family, society, and cultural attitudes. For example, how many of you buy a brand because it was always in the house growing up? You know, it's just something that you're used to, and it's just a staple in your house. So when you start making your own home, it becomes a part of your house as well. Or has something changed your has it changed your perception of something because of an opinion leader or a societal group you associate with or relate to? For example, you changed to a different type of caffeine drink once you started college because that's what was popular among your peers. So all of a sudden you're not drinking your usual caffeine like coffee or whatever. You're drinking these monster drinks or something else because you see that your peers are drinking these and you want to fit in. So that's what part of the influence in the culture and in the society. Then you have your non-personal, which are things outside of your control, such as time, place, and environment. For example, you move to another state to attend college and see that some of your known influences are no longer readily available, so you adapt. Whether it be the type of, we'll go back to food, the type of food that you're used to the southern food here, but then you go north and you don't find collard greens or whatever it is readily available. So you adapt to this new environment, and that's non-personal. All right, then we get into the evaluation. So at this point, this is the critical point where you decide whether or not to buy the product or the item. But you still have to evaluate the different brands, sizes, colors, etc. to narrow your decision, because you're not going to get the things are not always just given to you in one particular way. Appliances, you can get white or stainless steel. So you have to decide, okay, do I want white, black, stainless steel in my apartment? Do I want it to be larger to fit the space that it's in, or am I going to make it smaller because I want to redecorate? Those sort of things. So you still have to go through an evaluation to that purchase. And then once you've purchased it, you go through what's called a post evaluation. And it's basically, was this a good decision? Why or why not? Okay, so it's considering what you have done. Was it right? Are you satisfied? All this will affect whether you keep or return the item and whether you stay with the brand for future purchases. Some people, okay, so if you buy a car and you buy a Chevrolet car this time, then your post-purchase, you may decide, okay, this, I really like the brand, it's doing very well. So the next time you are ready to buy a vehicle, you are more likely to go to the Chevrolet place first before you go to a Hyundai or some other dealership, because that you've experienced something good and you're going to stick with that unless the cultural influences and some other things come in and help you decide on doing something different. Or you might buy a particular dishwasher brand, and you realize this thing sucks. It didn't last very long. The warranty was horrible. So the next time when you have to go to replace it, you will decide on a different brand because that brand did not, it wasn't a good decision overall. And so you're less likely to buy that brand because you know that brand is not as trustworthy as another brand. So that's how you go through the evaluation. And sometimes people will experience what's called cognitive dissonance when they are doing their post-evaluation because they don't want to admit that they bought something horrible. So they will justify the behavior by reducing the inconsistency between beliefs and reality. So, and it happens. It happens. All right. So the last thing I'm going to talk about today is what's called learning theories as they relate to advertising. These involve our ways of learning our environment that affects our behavior. For example, learning that a food is delicious leads to eating more, or learning that a hot stove burns leads to keeping a safe distance from it in the kitchen. Now, there's a lot of learning theories out there, but advertisers classify most of them into two broad categories: cognitive theory and conditioning theory. So cognitive theory views learning as a mental process of memory, thinking, and the rational application of knowledge to practical problems. A good description of how we learn from the experience of others and how we evaluate complex purchase decisions. So in conditioning, this is more of a stimulus response. So it treats learning as a trial and error process. The consumer responds to a stimulus, and if the consumer's response reduces the drive, then satisfaction occurs, and the response is rewarded or reinforced. This process is applicable to simple, basic purchases that consumers make every day. All right. So learning produces attitudes and interests that leads to habits and brand loyalty. Learning also defines needs and wants through a consumer's motivation process. And make sure you review Maslow's hierarchy of needs to better understand how people meet their needs according to their priorities. Okay, so that is the end of this lecture, and make sure that you review this. It'll be chapter 4 and 5 will be part on the quiz for Tuesday. All right, if you have any questions, you can email me, and I will see you Tuesday.